So in terms of my research on disability and entrepreneurship, a lot of it has focused on the various barriers that people with disabilities face when they try to engage in entrepreneurial action. So I've worked with a group of researchers in disability studies, and the approach to disability that we've taken in our research, we see disability as something that is part of the so-called societal model of disability. So we don't view disability as a medical condition or something like that that would be inherent to the individual. Rather, we look at the environment and the context where entrepreneurship takes place and how disability is a part of that context for these individuals. And like I said, how some of the barriers that people face are specific to those disabling environments that they have to go through. So with that, I guess there's two ways to think about these barriers. One type of barrier would be something that prevents a person with a disability even developing intentions to become an entrepreneur. So there's a lot of prejudices in the society, a lot of stereotypes about disability. And, sometimes if a person doesn't see themselves as a potential entrepreneur, they may not even start thinking about engaging in entrepreneurial action. But then if they do take that step and if they do develop those intentions, then there are other barriers that prevent people from actually acting on their intent, right? So there are other barriers that prevent intention from turning into action. Maybe the most obvious ones have to do with resources, financial resources. People with disability in the United States, more often than those without disabilities, they live in poverty, and access to funding, for example, may be a huge barrier that they face. Well, once someone does make that leap, though, and takes entrepreneurial action, then I think there's a third aspect to disability that you have to recognize too, which has to do with the nature of the opportunity that people with disabilities pursue. So as we know, the opportunities kind of emerge at this intersection of individual and their environment. And people with disabilities are oftentimes very attuned to those disabling environments that others are dealing with as well. So oftentimes they see business opportunities that actually have to do with their own experience as a person with disability. So I think those are some of the ways in which the disabling context and entrepreneurial action, they interact. Absolutely. So one of the projects that I'm involved in right now has to do with entrepreneurship training for high schoolers with disabilities. We're working with high schools here in Chicago, and we've created an entrepreneurship curriculum that is specifically designed for high school students who are having a lot of issues and challenges and who have disabilities. And then this kind of disability aware curriculum that we have created, we're currently piloting it for the first time and seeing how that may help get these individuals, engaged with their schooling, but also take entrepreneurial action maybe in the end. So that's one thing. I guess that's a very kind of practice or educationally oriented research project that I'm doing. Another idea that is kind of topical right now has to do with this pandemic, right? And how the pandemic has further changed the context in which disability takes place. And, it used to be that organizations were very hesitant to having people work from home, for example. And that's a typical accommodation that a lot of people with disabilities would ask for, whether the employing organization is an entrepreneurial one or a bigger corporation. And oftentimes these requests would be denied because it was not viewed as something that would work for the organization. Well, now all of us, more than half of the world, we've all worked from home for a year and a half, and look, we're still here. So certainly the pandemic has created maybe silver lining in some ways for people with disabilities. There's also examples now of, venture capitalists even doing deals without actually physically interacting with the entrepreneur. And so the acceptance of these technological tools that we have as more mainstream, I think that's something that people with disabilities appreciate, like I said, as a silver lining maybe of this pandemic. At the same time, disability, the incidence of disability is on the rise and has been on the rise for a long time, the prevalence of disability in the society. But then we have, as a result of the pandemic, there are these ongoing conversations like, what is disability? Are these people who have the long-term symptoms from COVID, are they people with disabilities? And when does something like that become a disability? And again, as an entrepreneurship scholar, we may be asking questions there about how can entrepreneurship maybe be something that can help or become a part of this future where some people are dealing with really serious long-term effects from COVID. So. I feel like by pointing out some names, I'm certainly going to be leaving out other names that are equally important or even maybe more so. But someone whose work I actually built on myself early on, who's been looking at this space for a long time, is Benson Honig from Canada. He's worked with others as well and built interesting research stream in this area. I guess more recently, the work from Syracuse University has been getting a lot of attention. So Johan Wiklund as a senior professor there, and then others working together with him have looked at issues at the intersection of disability and entrepreneurship, and certainly not only in North America, right? There's plenty of research in other parts of the world as well. Someone whose work I've been following as well is Thomas Cooney from Ireland, and he's especially his policy-oriented work in this area, I think, is really interesting. So growing, and there's more and more individuals reaching out and becoming interested in this. There was just 2 weeks ago, Old Dominion University organized a Kaufman-sponsored conference, or I guess they called it a colloquium, on what they call transitional entrepreneurship. And disability would be one of the topics at that colloquium that was gathering a lot of interest. But other underestimated, underserved populations as well. So given that, like I said in the beginning, I've kind of adopted this more societal view of, or societal model even of disability, I think there's plenty of opportunity to integrate theories that address, institutions into this space, relevant for entrepreneurial action, disability for sure. Another area where there's research emerging, and I guess this would be more on the side of like, what are some of the outcome variables that we're looking at, and again, related to the pandemic too. There's plenty of research coming out on well-being and entrepreneurship, and it really seems like disability should be a part of that conversation. I mean, 10% more or less of the population has a disability of some kind, and that clearly is a part of the well-being conversation and has to be there when we look at entrepreneurship and well-being. In terms of the phenomenon of disability and where's that going in entrepreneurship research, I'm really excited about opportunities to look at the intersections of different kind of social categories of individuals and what's happening there. One of the things that we've seen in our research is that when we recruit people with disabilities for our studies, we do get a lot of minorities responding, and certainly, both genders as well. When you think of barriers to entrepreneurial action, disability may create certain types of barriers, but what about someone who's, a woman of color and has a disability? So what's the nature of the interaction of the various barriers for these types of individuals? And at the same time, not only the barriers, but also the opportunity side of it. What can we create, or what can they create as entrepreneurs that serves those around them as well? And then in terms of methods, I'm a big fan of integrating individuals with disabilities very closely with the research. So not only looking at big large scale data sets and trying to figure out what's going on there, but really doing participatory research among people with disabilities and making sure that their voices are heard. I think that's really important if this field at the intersection of entrepreneurship and disability is to be integrated with a larger disability conversations in sociology and whatnot. We need to make sure that the voices of individuals with disabilities are heard and are channeled to our research. So I think that's really important methodologically.